Okay, everyone, let's get going. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 46 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flochat of mxdwn.com. Thanks so much for joining us. So glad to see you well. Got a whole bunch of stuff to cover as we continue on the road to recovery. If any of you saw last week's show and the dismal disgrace that has been my health lately, so I'm very happy to be feeling somewhat better. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So let's dive right in as there's all kinds of crazy crap going on. First and foremost, wanted to bring you a story that I think is some measure of despicable in a way that I don't think I'd ever expected to. So, for those of you that are aware of late 90s, early 2000s rock or nu metal, now in America, the most popular rock scene after grunge and alternative became what was commonly known as nu metal, which was largely regarded as like a hybridization of, heavy metal and hip hop. And a lot of bands that weren't exactly hip hop or other things kind of got folded into there. And that was what happened as Linkin Park became the most popular thing in rock music in those era. Now, there was a band at the time that got very popular. Their name was Stained, Staind. For those of you that aren't familiar, they were signed by Jordan Shore and Fred Durst, of all people, of Limp Bizkit fame. And ultimately, they were signed to Flip Records as a part of the deal that Jordan Shore's record label had, and working with Fred Durst as A&R. A whole bunch of bands found a lot of success by being a part of that circle at the time. Most significantly, their album Break the Cycle from 2001, which had singles including Fade and the very, very famous at the time, and how many people might remember it nowadays, but it's been a while, which were very popular singles at that time. So Staind became a pretty popular rock band right around the same time as Linkin Park and also POD, bands like that, as, Korn, the Deftones, and, Rage Against the Machine had already been popular for years. And, the band has been like a lot of bands, not together for a while, together for a while. Aaron Lewis, the lead singer of the band, has had something of a growing solo career as a singer-songwriter in his own respect. Now, Aaron Lewis is one of these like Ted Nugent type characters, where has espoused a lot of politics and a lot of viewpoints that we may not love here at Mixdown. We don't have a political standpoint as a publication, and our coverage doesn't either. But if somebody is saying or supporting something that we think is reprehensible, we don't tend to go out of our way to cover it. Now, on some level, there are certain things that bear covering as far as news and information is concerned, because it's important to inform the public about what's happening. You might want to know what this person stands for. It might impact positively or negatively what you think about them. But ultimately, I have kind of a viewpoint, and I work with our music editor, Sky, about this quite a lot, which is if somebody's saying or doing something that's outwardly reprehensible, we don't necessarily try to just constantly give them a viewpoint and to be, trumpeting what they think and the terrible things they may be saying or doing. This happens a lot with Ted Nugent, for example. Ted Nugent says all kinds of things that we really can't stand behind. And at some level, people know who he is. We're not really doing any service illuminating anything further there. Now, Aaron Lewis has been no stranger to some very far-right opinions over the last few years, and who knows if that's always been a part of his ideology or if that's a more recent thing that's been happening. But it hasn't been something that we've really messed with, bothered with. It just hasn't felt newsworthy or important or significant. Well, something came up in the last week that was kind of impossible to ignore, which was that he, being an avid hunter, and this is something that is very, very common for him, he's, gun supporting person in favor of gun rights and all of that mess, and a climate where mass shootings are becoming the average everyday norm. And he basically, along with some of his friends, went where he lived and engaged in a massive coyote hunt, and apparently killed enough coyotes to have killed 32 of them, and then used the carcasses of the coyotes to spell out a shot, which they shot somehow from the air, to post on social media, where he spelled out, and no, I'm not kidding, Trump 24 in 32 dead coyotes. Now, if you know anything about me in my own world, I'm not necessarily the world's biggest coyote fan. I mean, coyotes are predators. They're hunters. They're carnivores. And, they're treacherous. They don't generally bother humans, but they have sometimes. And I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of them, but like a lot of wildlife, it's like, just leave them alone. As long as they're not messing with us, not generally a lot needs to happen. And it was kind of hard to swallow seeing 32 members of any species being massacred and then used as a political prop. I mean, the Trump presidency that was, and the, presidential campaign that is, has certainly done enough damage to this country and to people and divisiveness and politics. And to see that many things murdered just feels like the height of shitty. Aaron Lewis had to additionally comment to add to this that, who knew it would take exactly 32 dead coyotes to write such a poignant message to this amazing country we are all watching crumble before our eyes. I don't even know where to begin. Now, obviously, this is a pretty terrible and unnecessary thing. I mean, even if you're protecting a crop of animals, there's just no reason to go on that level of a hunt and then, of course, use it for a political prop, and not to mention as a vague promotion for some form of a tour that he's about to do. Not surprisingly, PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, their vice president, Lisa Lang, had something to say in regards to this event and what happened, indicating how vile and pathetic that a washed-up musician desperate for relevance terrorized and killed animals to get a brief taste of the attention he obviously craves. She went on, adding from there, just like dogs who share our homes, coyotes feel pain and fear and love their families, and because they're one of the few species found in nearly every U.S. state, they're beloved by many Americans as their song dog. PETA encourages Aaron Lewis to seek attention through some act of kindness rather than slaughtering individuals who are simply trying to eke out an existence in an increasingly paved-over world. It's a rare thing where I find myself very much in alignment with what PETA has to say on something, but there's just no way I can see this as necessary. I'm no vegan in my world and my life and my eating habits, but it's just ridiculous. In other insidious news, Spotify. Now, this is going to be another one of those things that probably a lot of you might not be very happy to hear. A lot of people like Spotify. A lot of people like to use Spotify. That has become like the de facto way of engaging in streaming music. And I've long said that Spotify is like the Microsoft Windows of streaming, which is to say not very well built, does not work very well, does not take very good care of the artists that are a part of the platform, and, is just generally that big because they got to everybody first. Just like Microsoft Windows did in the 90s, they won the war for computer operating systems, not because they were better. They just got to more people quicker. They've, got a crappier product in more people's hands, and they just kept patching it endlessly. And to me, that's kind of Spotify for music streaming. It's not necessarily a good thing. It's just everywhere. It's pervasive. Now, Spotify has long been accused of being a platform where, unless you're The Weeknd or Taylor Swift or Adele or some giant of industry, it does not mean the kind of income that conventional music play models, sales, radio airplay, licensing, and promotion has always meant. It's pennies. It's a tiny fraction of money. And then, of course, depending on your record label deal, if you're on some formulation of a record label, depending on the deal and the deal that was struck, maybe they take a portion of that first. They have to rebate it to you to see it. It's long been a point of controversy that what they make artists isn't enough. Well, apparently facing scrutiny from some of the upper echelons of the music business, the record business, there has been pressure to, I guess, deliver more. And this is a ham-fisted solution if I've ever heard one. They're basically indicating that they believe there are, and this is their words, 3 drains on the royalty pool. 3 drains on the royalty pool, all of which are currently stopping money from getting to working artists. Now, 2 of the things that they mention there makes sense. I will give them credit. If this is a thing, then I don't know why they haven't stopped it already. One of those things is fraudulent content, meaning people spinning up content and creating content to like erroneously create streams. They're not really artists. They're not, really bands or artists trying to make a career or a living for themselves. Just some company using it as a way to try to create revenue. I get that. If that's a thing, goodbye. If they're not real music, they're not musicians, sure, they shouldn't be there. Also, people who are threading what they're calling noise tracks. Now, this is a little difficult because if you're someone like, say, Masami Akita, who is Merzbow, does your music less warrant being monetized and making money? Because that is arguably not really listenable music. It's not first chorus verse song structure. It's not really vocals or lyrics in most of Merzbow's music, but Merzbow makes really great music. But admittedly, there might be people just recording white noise, throwing it up. And then that brings up a deeper artistic question of, well, where is this a song and where is this not? Okay, but then the third thing, and this is the thing that is decently reprehensible to me, that they're going to introduce a threshold minimum annual streams before a track starts generating royalties. Now, details right now, as far as reporting time here, don't indicate what that threshold is, but they're going to basically demonetize what an artist or band's song can make unless that threshold is achieved. So that means that for younger aspiring artists or people who don't have a foothold or major label backing, you make nothing until you somehow become popular enough to reach that threshold. This making this, in my opinion, even more a platform that helps and benefits the biggest and the most powerful already, who probably don't really need Spotify revenue in general anyways. But now if you're someone who's trying to make ends meet and make a go of it, it's even harder to do that. There's reporting as recently as this week from someone, say, Corey Taylor, the lead singer of Slipknot, which is a very, very popular heavy metal band. And Corey Taylor indicating because there's so many of them, because there's crew they got to take care of, none of the band members are living like incredibly well off. They're okay, they're paid, they've got homes, they can take care of their kids, they make a living, but none of them are rich in the way that people are supposed to believe a major superstar in music would be. And that's Slipknot. I mean, we're not talking about some random garage band. Now, admittedly, there's a budgeting thing, there's a production thing there's an expectation, costumes and other effects and stuff like that. But that ought to tell you something about how hard it is to be something in this game, in music anyways. And then now, if you're something of an aspiring artist who you have no money, you're not getting paid very much for shows, you're not getting put on, you're not getting advances, now can't make anything on your songs on that platform. This is comparable, just in case you're curious, to things like platforms like YouTube. YouTube has long had a platform where, and sometimes Instagram has had this, Twitch has had this, where there is not profit sharing until you reach a certain benchmark of popularity. So if you're a user, a practitioner of the system, like say, for example, the way Mixdown is here on YouTube, you're not getting paid to create content for that platform, even though they're making money on your content. And that's a part of the contract of being a part of it. You're using their discovery engine. You're using their chance to be able to reach people. Unless they feel you've reached a certain minimum threshold, they don't slice you in on anything. There was a time a few years ago where that bar went up for YouTube, and a lot of content creators that were people who made a lot of content for YouTube found themselves suddenly demonetized, and they were very upset about that. But now, in the world of music, this is a crazy, terrible thing. It's hard enough to make a living doing anything in music, to make anywhere in music. And now certain people below a certain benchmark are going to get cut out by the number one discovery engine for music right now. That just brings kind of crappy to me. I think the interesting thing that's not said here is, where is that threshold? What point do you need to be at? How long and what is it going to take in terms of identifying what that is? And that's kind of a hole in the reporting that's out there, and we are going to work here with our music team, try to find clarity for that, and hopefully bring that to you in subsequent shows that we do here. And This Week is Live. Other interesting news, going to kind of like a mutation over from music to movies, and this is one of those rare moments where something that is as relevant to music is now becoming relevant to the world of movies, and that's part of what makes this so fascinating. Last year, we brought you the news that Taylor Swift's stadium tour had basically become the biggest tour in history. This is a fantastic and crazy thing, and I'm no fan of Taylor Swift's music, but Taylor Swift sold out 50 plus stadium dates in one day. Biggest tour ever in the history of anything by any artist, male or female or any ways, period. It's an incredible achievement, right? It says something about Taylor Swift's popularity. Now, that tour went, lots of people saw that show. It was called the Eras Tour, and it basically was, kind of like chronicling in the show different eras of her career. Sometimes just albums, other times just brackets of different portions of her career. And that's why it was called the Eras Tour. It was a 3-hour plus show that spawned 10 different sections that covering 10 different brackets of her material. She obviously had numerous albums and numerous songs. Well, apparently, her and her team thought it would be an interesting idea to create a movie, filming footage from 3 of the shows that happened in Los Angeles at the SoFi Stadium. Taylor Swift basically had, on their own budget, filmed a bunch of content for this, and ultimately, their plan was to release this as a movie, for people who either wanted to relive the experience or maybe for people who didn't want to go to concerts like that and go to a 40,000 person show. And ultimately, what's really, really interesting about this is that it has come out and it actually won the box office, even in its second week, beating Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, which is his massive 3-hour and 26-minute movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio and a whole mess of pretty talented actors. And, very timely story looking at something horrible and heinous that happened to Native Americans in this country. And ultimately, Taylor Swift, even in the second week, came out at $32.4 million in the domestic box office over Killers of the Flower Moon's $23 million. Crazy. It just goes to show you the power and the popularity of Taylor Swift. Now, one of the things that's unique about this, and apparently has some tail feathers ruffled in various corners of the movie industry, there's a very elaborate and complicated mechanism where there's movie makers, movie distributors, distributor companies package and sell movies to movie theater chains. There's a percentage and a negotiation, a rebate. Most of that money goes back to the movie distributors and the movie studios. This is why when you go to a movie theater, popcorn and soda and other things cost so much money, because that's where the movie theater makes most of their money. Most of that money goes back to distributors. Well, apparently Taylor Swift and her camp were in negotiation trying to go through the conventional release platform for this, and the deals and negotiations broke down. Probably most likely Taylor Swift knew they had leverage, and Taylor Swift and her management knew they had leverage and did not have to capitulate to terms the movie industry was indicating they wanted, and then ultimately went around that whole system straight to the theater chains and made a deal with AMC Theaters and Cinemark, putting this out, circumventing the whole cycle, and kind of announcing it out of nowhere, causing a whole bunch of movies to have to jump and to ultimately leave where they were in their cycle of release to avoid getting steamrollered by this. Now, of course, this is probably a life-saving boon for the movie theater chains in general, because right now almost all the content is starting to run out. There was some decent stretch going back to, the recent Spider-Verse, Miles Morales Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and, a decent stretch of summer movies, but now all of that's kind of running out and a lot of things have been moved. The only real major thing on the calendar right now is the Marvels coming out in a couple weeks from Marvel, Captain Marvel 2, which is probably what it should have been named. And ultimately, a lot of these movie studios move their movies off these dates to avoid just getting bowled over by Taylor Swift, which is, of course, exactly what would have happened and what is happening. And, something that's a 3-hour and 26-minute movie and Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese's been around for a long time. Don't know that would have been a giant blockbuster anyways, but super, super interesting that something like this comes in just basically on the steam of Taylor Swift's popularity and can just kind of do whatever it wants. And like everything that she is, just making money on literally anything that she's putting out. Now, in sadder and much more complicated news, there's something that we've been tracking for a while, which is the case of Jonathan Majors. Now, Jonathan Majors is a rising actor. He's a part of the show Lovecraft Country that only got one season at HBO, and also had been cast in several high-profile movies, including Creed, alongside Michael B. Jordan at the beginning of the year, late last year, and then also, most significantly, showing up in Loki's first season as He Who Remains, otherwise known as Kang the Conqueror, and then more officially as Kang the Conqueror in the very bad movie Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. An ascendant star, someone who's very talented, starring in a lot of indie darling movies at the same time. Jonathan Majors basically has found himself in a lot of hot water. And it has been playing out for a time with not much in the way of comment from anyone involved. So this happened back in March 25th in Chelsea, Manhattan. And there was an altercation between him and his then girlfriend, Grace Jabari. Now, a lot of the details of what happened there is just alleged domestic violence. No one really was terribly sure of the details. But Jonathan Majors was arrested. And ever since, what's been playing out is that his attorney, Priya Chaudhry, has basically been making the case that Jonathan Majors should be found innocent, that Jonathan Majors was not guilty of what is said, he was arrested erroneously, and they've gone so far as to claim that Jonathan Majors, I guess ex-girlfriend now, Grace Jabari, was actually the perpetrator of the incident. This is all alleged. No one really knows any of this for sure. This could take a very long time to play out, just for the record. But what's significant about this is that Jonathan Majors' attorneys have been representing they have evidence that proves he's innocent and that he was the victim and not the other way around. That's what they're alleging. And they were pushing for a complete dismissal of the trial. And this is obviously being charged by the Manhattan District Attorney in Manhattan, New York. And ultimately, this has gone through. The hearing was heard, and the dismissal request was denied. So Jonathan Majors is going to trial for these charges. Now, what's interesting about this is in the filing that has basically put forth that he is going to go to trial about these charges is that some of the details in terms of what happened has indicated allegedly, and we're not going to state any of this as fact, obviously, because this is their account in their court filing documents of why they want us to go to trial, what they're alleging he did. So, in case you're squeamish on domestic violence or things like that, just as a little warning for you here as we get into this. We're not going to go into too much detail, but just in terms of what has been alleged. It was alleged that there was they were driving in a car, Jonathan Majors and Jabari, and there was a text message. Apparently, allegedly, the woman took his phone, and then what was alleged by the district attorney in Manhattan was that he began grabbing the right side of her body and allegedly prying her right middle finger off the phone, causing bruising, swelling, and substantial pain. This is what they're alleging. They alleged that he grabbed her arm and then twisted it. They alleged that he struck her in the right ear, causing a laceration to the back of her ear and substantial pain. They alleged he took his phone back, was leaving the car. They alleged that the woman tried to follow him, and then they alleged he grabbed her, picked her up, and threw her back inside the car. They're alleging she sustained substantial pain, including a fractured finger, bruising about her body. This is what they're alleging about all of this. Now, Chaudhry, Jonathan Majors' attorney, is indicating that they have evidence that they want kept under seal that proves his innocence, but this is all actually happening, and they're going to be going to trial November 29th. And expect this to be a big media kerfluffle as this all goes down, because, of course, Jonathan Majors was about to be a big star. And in a post-Me Too world, it would probably be surprising if a major company like Marvel kept someone like this on if they were found guilty. But nobody's saying anything. No one's commented anything. Loki Season 2 is airing right now. It's a very good show. Jonathan Majors is in it as another a kind of annoying formulation of Kang the Conqueror, but ultimately, right now, everything's happening and nothing has been changed. And I think probably what you're seeing, and this is my estimation of things, is everyone's holding their breath to find out if this was true or not. And it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch in terms of finding out what the real details of this is, what is or isn't possible to be proved, and the ramifications that will come from it. So this is something that's going to play out in November. We'll bring you more information when the time comes, when that all happens. As an interesting side note, Jonathan Majors and his attorney had filed charges against Grace Jabari, claiming domestic assault on Jonathan Majors himself. She, just today, was arrested for it, but the Manhattan District Attorney has declined to follow and to try to pursue charges beyond that arrest. Now, what evidence they presented, what they're alleging, what the truth of that is, all remains to be seen, how that will factor into the upcoming trial. So we'll keep you posted on that as it goes. And then last two kind of quick little things here, just before we get into today's story. There is ultimately kind of an interesting little factoid right now. If you're in the world of video games, you're probably very happy if you're a PlayStation fan, because Spider-Man 2 has come out. Now, not to be confused with the numerous Spider-Man 2 movies there have been over the year, because count them, there's actually 3 of them now. There's been 3 Spider-Man 2 movies that have been released with different Peter Parkers and all of that. And, of course, the Miles Morales version of it. But this is Spider-Man 2, the video game, which was a very successful game for PlayStation 4, the original Spider-Man. Nothing really to the title beyond that, just called Spider-Man, and now this one's Spider-Man 2, one of the more looked for and excited for titles of the entire year. And it's a very big hit, which isn't entirely surprising. It looked really great. The early footage that Sony showed looked really great. And ultimately, it has sold very, very well. And they are touting this figure so far. It's always kind of nebulous what sales figures. There's not a lot of truing up of those sales figures to report it. It's kind of what the studios are self-reporting in terms of those numbers. There isn't like a mandatory thing where studios have to release these kinds of sales figures, but Sony is claiming that this is the fastest selling Sony PlayStation title, where they made it. That's what that means. And it had sold 2.5 million copies in 24 hours. Now, they haven't released the first week numbers. We'll have that soon enough, I'm sure. But interesting side note in terms of comparison, God of War Ragnarok, which is one of Sony's other really big first-party titles, that was the previous record holder and had sold 5.1 million copies in its first week. And then lastly, and just because there's a million trillion Beatles fans out there, a gabillion, just to make up a word, the Beatles are going to have one last, and this is not a joke, one last new song. There is a new Beatles song coming out on November 2nd. It's called Now and Then. So this comes from a demo that John Lennon had recorded all the way back in the late 70s. He had done it with just piano and vocals. Somehow the recording lost, wasn't found, wasn't known about, all the way until 1994 when it was given to Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. And then they kind of considered on it, and ultimately George Harrison had decided it wasn't possible to extricate John Lennon's vocal track from the piano. The technology was not there in the mid-90s to make it happen. There's just no way they could have Frankenstein's monster into it, into a song. And apparently George Harrison's widow Olivia indicated that this was his indication at the time. Back in 1995, after several days in the studio working on the track, George felt the technical issues of the demo were insurmountable and concluded that it was not possible to finish the track to a high enough standard. So, fast forward to now. Technology has changed quite a bit, and there is a lot of artificial intelligence software out there. Well, apparently, coming on the heels of Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary about the Let It Be recording sessions, the Beatles' surviving members, which is, of course, Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney, were inspired by how the AI software used, was able to isolate and identify different pieces of conversation amidst other background noise, to be able to isolate portions of it and to be able to surface that. So what happened was they used that software to recreate Now and Then. So there are parts that George Harrison had recorded prior to his death. There is the John Lennon vocals, which has been extricated from this song through AI, and then of course parts from Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. So for those of you that are big Beatles fans, and I know there's a lot of you out there across all genres and spectrums of music fans, everything, everyone, I know a lot of people love the Beatles. Here's your last chance to hear something new from them. With all of them there. Not anything else that's there has been unearthed. This is it. Pretty fascinating to think all of these years later that there's something still new coming, even if it's not exactly, John Lennon wasn't really involved. Obviously, this is a demo of something he wrote a long time ago, and now there's a song that's been written around it. But that's not terribly uncommon for the world of music. If you're not a big music fan, you're not aware. A lot of times when you see these reissues, unreleased songs, there was something from Louis Armstrong. It was like a poem he read into a microphone. They recorded music around it. This is kind of a common thing for long-deceased artists. So, as we wrap up here today, and now that we are through today's stories, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about something else that was apparent to me. And this is something that's been kind of bubbling over, and I think this is a kind of a holdover from the pandemic, which, as you saw last week's show, I would argue is still very much a pandemic and not very much an endemic, as I think we are being told and as I think a lot of people want to think. And I totally don't blame anyone for that. The pandemic sucked. Having to worry about COVID-19 sucks. Having to worry about getting COVID-19 sucks, and its effects on literally everything: business, economy, art, ability to be with friends, family, loved ones. It sucks. But one of the things that I noticed back last year, almost exactly a year ago in October, I did a cross-country trip. Went from Connecticut, helping my family move something, all the way through Dallas, Texas, and then back on through into Los Angeles. Kind of a life stream, long unfulfilled, to actually traverse all of the United States of America. And one of the things that was really apparent to me, that anyone that I've talked to since had a lot of trouble swallowing, I guess, digesting, believing, was that almost everywhere I went along this trip, and, living generally in Southern California, thinking that, maybe I had noticed this in Southern California, and I had, but thinking maybe this is a Southern California thing. Maybe this has something to do with the politics, the climate, the economics of being Southern California. It's an expensive place. It's hard to be here, hard to make a living here, hard to be able to afford to live here. And it's always been kind of a problem of living in Southern California in general. But when I came across the country, it was very evident to me that it felt like almost all of America had hit the fuck it switch. There's no other way of putting it. Every person I interacted with, anyone I met at any restaurant or any hotel or any gas station, anyone that I had any chance to see or be a part of, you could feel that they were just bowled over. Gooses just totally cooked, totally past the point of caring, didn't really like what they were doing or where they were doing, didn't feel good about it. That pervasive sense of frustration, that pervasive sense of difficulty just seemed to be everywhere. Now, since I've returned, and obviously it's been a year and done a lot of different things, gone to different trips, been to Vegas, been to Portland, been to other places, I still feel and see it everywhere that I've been since. You can feel the culture of our country, the people, just kind of spiritually and psychologically devastated, decimated, torn down to the foundations. I mean, our wonderful and cute notions of freedom and power and control and safety obliterated by this whole experience. And of course, in a world gone crazy with inflation, two very difficult and very not pretty wars happening, one in Ukraine and then one coming off of Israel and Gaza and everything that's happening there. And ultimately, everyone's patience and, ability to hold the line just worn paper thin. You can feel that grief and remorse damn near everywhere. Now, I don't know the remedy for that, and I wasn't alive long enough ago to see what it was like when the Spanish flu hit, when quite a bit more people died because we didn't have RNA vaccine technology, the ability to come to a vaccine so quickly. All reports indicate was a comparable atmosphere in the aftermath of the Spanish flu, but at the same time, I don't know the solution to any of this. I don't know what way back there is. I talked last week about being at Power Trip Festival and feeling like it was a weird kind of almost a reflection of a world that doesn't exist anymore. Looking and acting and going to a festival and being a part of a giant raucous rock crowd post a pandemic, it felt like it had an energy. And I think all the shows that I have seen, not that there's been a ton, but any of the shows that I've been to since everything went down in 2020 have a feeling of that manic, we want to be a part of what we remember this being like. This is why there's been able to be pretty big crowds behind things and pretty big attendance behind things. And you've got weird reports of people paying up to $1,000 for Lana Del Rey tickets. I mean, someone who's played everywhere. It's not very much a rarity, Lana Del Rey being out there. I mean, there's a palpable discomfort and there's a palpable kind of malaise behind seemingly everything everywhere. I feel for everyone. It's been a rough few years. It hasn't been easy. It hasn't been fun, but it's also made for an incredibly difficult experience. Try being anyone who doesn't have the wealth and power to just bowl things over and pay whatever you need to get whatever you want. Try being anyone who's out there trying to make something go or to be a part of a small business or a small career and look at the ineptitude, the lethargy, the lack of caring. And I mean, on some level, totally don't blame people, because who wants to work at a Go Network job that doesn't really make you anywhere near enough money, right? Like, in a world where you really can't get a foothold, who wants to do a lot of those remedial things? I get it. It's difficult, and I can't say that I blame anyone, and I don't know really what the answer is. Going back earlier in the show, I'm sure it's not killing 32 coyotes. I'll go that far. I'm sure that doesn't get us out of this mess. But it is an interesting and perplexing thing, because try to call customer service. In some cases, take Facebook or Google. Try finding customer service. There's no such thing. Try finding any kind of parity or equal footing in the face of things that you might need to live, to exist. Or what if something bad happens? What if something goes wrong and you need a redress for justice in the face of what these things are? Good luck. It's an abnormal circumstance, and it is incredibly difficult. Now, I can't speak to macroeconomic affairs. I'm not an economic theorist. I'm not a master politician or political mind. I can say that obviously everything is certainly a reaction and an evolution from what has gone down, right? Everything is kind of reacting to the things that have come since. There's not one person that's guilty. There is a series of circumstances that various people reacted to and tried to do the right thing as time went on. Those problems are large tectonic forces of nature, things moving under our feet that we don't necessarily control. But at some level, you have to wonder, where does the responsibility lie within us? Where does the responsibility come down to in terms of our own notions of personal responsibility? One of the things I sermonize about, being editor-in-chief of a publication such as Mixdown, is everything we do is everything we say about ourselves. What we're communicating to the world, and forget me or anything that is my name, Mixdown as a whole, but more importantly, each individual writer, contributor, participant, that effort and that care that we put into things is what we're telling the world. Here's what we think about ourselves. So I purposely try to advocate for that personal self-reliance, that care in the craftsmanship of what we make or what we're trying to exhibit to the public. Take that relationship seriously. And I'm not here to sermonize anyone or browbeat anyone, because obviously things have been immensely difficult. But it is a thing that just seems to be coming up a lot in a lot of aspects of a lot of different things. Shit is rough all over. I understand and appreciate that. But on some level, whereas we may not be able to control those giant things above us or underneath us, those things that are the environment or nature as a whole, what we do have control over is us, our own choices and our own care in things. Now, nobody has to do a job they don't want to do. No one has to be in a place they don't want to be. But if you are doing something, what does it hurt to take that little bit more effort to care, to show that pride in that, and to have that relationship in terms of everyone is a part of something, needs something, is in an interaction, whether that's making food or creating content or administrating information or delivering packages and parcels or material or media. Everything has a point and everything has a purpose, and we all have to get by. We've all got to feel okay in this world. So my purpose and my point here is only to draw attention to it and to perhaps advocate on some level, as hard as this has all been, and as hard as it surely will be, anything we can put back into that is that cumulative snowball effect that makes everything perhaps just a little bit more attentive to all of us. Reduce the tension instead of more and more discord and disdain and frustration. It doesn't get us anywhere. That's all for episode 46 of This Week is Live. I want to thank you again for joining us and engaging with our content any of the places that you do, whether it's here live on Twitch, where we broadcast our show, whether it's on YouTube, where we post these after the fact. I know last week's episode was a little late. We had a little bit of a technical issue. We're working through it right now, so last week's episode will be up soon, and then we'll have this week's episode probably Tuesday of next week. Or if you engage with us, any of the places that we post these viral clips, be it Instagram and Reels, whether it's in TikTok, whether it's in YouTube Shorts, or is it Twitter or Facebook, we thank you so much for joining us. We've got all kinds of cool surprises and different twists and other kinds of video content coming. I know we've talked about that a lot. It's all in the works. This is just the beginning. I can promise you that. We want to thank you for joining us. Please come back next week when we broadcast this live on Twitch. If you're seeing this on YouTube, we broadcast these episodes live on Twitch every Thursday, roughly between 5:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. So please come back and join us there, or see us when we upload these episodes after the fact to YouTube. For now, we thank you for joining us. Come back next week. We'll be back with more stories, more fun, more intro comments. Thanks for joining us. So glad to see you well.